Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Andy Paul. Andy is a, let's call it, many decades veteran in the sales world. Most recently, and right now, he is the host of the Sales Enablement podcast with Andy Paul, which is hosted by Ring DNA. He is also the founder of the Sales House, which is a sales leadership accelerator for VPs of sales and sales managers for high growth companies. He's also the founder of Zero Time Selling. He's an author, speaker, podcaster, founder, strategist, consultant, all around sales dude. And you're going to hear exactly why in just a couple of minutes. In fact, there's a lot of guests that we have here on the show. And many times when I have a guest, I have a really specific topic or an area of expertise that I want to use the time to learn more about, whether it's, how do I do prospecting in a better way, or how do I think about product demos, or what's the right way to do outbound, or hiring is a topic that we've covered many, many times. And so with Andy, my entire goal, the one objective that I wanted for this podcast was just to have a really deep conversation around sales, a philosophical conversation around sales. And I got to tell you, we nailed it. In fact, through about midway through the podcast, I even told Andy, I said, look, I'm not even sure exactly what kind of conversation I wanted to have, but I know this is exactly the kind of conversation that I wanted to have and why I wanted to have him on the podcast. So just to give you a quick preview of just some of the topics that we talked through over the course of our philosophical conversation on sales, we talked about topics like the paradox of choice. We talked about some organizational behavior and organizational psychology. We talked about Herbert Simon, who is a Nobel Prize winner in the field of economics, and his book, Bounded Rationality. We talked about Daniel Kahneman, who many of you might know for some of his books, including Thinking Fast and Slow. We talked about the importance of telling the truth and the difference between building a promotion versus building a company. We talked about the difference between being a sales manager and being a sales coach, and why, whether you are a sales manager, a head of sales, or you're the founder of a company, knowing that there's a big difference between a sales manager and a sales coach. And in fact, why you should pretty strongly consider having a sales coach on staff as part of your team, in addition to a VP of sales, and how in many cases, we might be setting up our VPs of sales to fail because a VP of sales that's highly effective as a manager and as a VP of sales may not be a great coach. And we talked quite a bit about that particular topic. We talked about productivity growth and how in the sales world, we've had all of these different technological tools, technological innovations over the last 10 years, everything from email tools and messaging tools and presentation tools and meeting tools and all the different toolkits, the thousands of different ways that we can become allegedly more productive and more efficient in our sales operations. But in fact, we're not. We're actually not selling that much more stuff. We're not converting that many more deals, if at all. And so we talked through why that is and what we should be doing as sellers to get away from these different technology tools as a crutch and get back to doing what we just would consider real sales in some ways. We talked about the challenge of having too many prospects in your sales pipeline and focusing too much on filling the top of the funnel with lots and lots of leads and not doing a good enough job of really understanding conversion rates and why 10% or 20% conversion rate is just not acceptable, and how we need to change those conversion rates if we're really serious about changing the way that we sell. We talked about the spaghetti diagram, which you'll have to listen more about, different studies from places like Forrester and Gardner Group. We talked about retention time and a number of different other topics, really running the gamut around sales, sales management, and managing your sales process. So I was really excited that Andy took the time to join us here on the podcast. Really thrilled to have him spend some of his day with us. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. It'll help you think differently when you consider your approach to sales. I think for me, I've been doing sales for 25 years. Andy's been doing sales for probably 45 years. And I learned a lot in this last hour or so with Andy. So really glad to have him on the show. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Andy Paul.
Scott, how you doing?
Dude, I'm good. I was going to call you pal or buddy or something like that.
So you read that, huh?
Of course I read it. It was one of those posts that I don't spend, I spend time on LinkedIn,
Right.
usually in the afternoon. I have a little window and I always enjoy it. It's almost like a surprise, like what article is going to be on top of the feed. And that happened to be the one that was on the top of the feed. And I both shook my head because I don't think I've ever said pal or buddy, but I know as a guy, we oftentimes use the man or hey, like I just say, hey dude, because I'm in California. So it's just like a natural thing to do.
Well, yeah, the thing that's interesting, I think, is, well, I mean, first of all, the response was overwhelmingly favorable for that, not saying those things. But for the people that were so strenuously defended being able to do that, it just sort of struck me as like, okay, do you really understand what's important in sales? And are you giving a thought? Because if they were, then they would know that everything's important. And you just can't make an assumption about, hey, just because somebody doesn't object, I'll use this language. It's like, could be the difference. You never know.
It reminded me of a book I read many years ago. It was the first book my first sales manager gave me, which is Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And there was a whole chapter in the book, the magic of your name, of a person's name.
Yep.
And saying it right.
Yeah,
and that always stuck with me. Yeah. And I actually put that to work because I used to sell college textbooks to university professors, and many of them are international.
Right.
And there was this one statistics professor at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, a long Greek last name, and I practiced that thing for 20 minutes outside of his office until I went in there. I think I got it right. I'm not sure, but at least I was like, I'm going to at least put this to work. I was 22 years old, salesperson. Book. I'm like, I'm going to at least give it a try. It was a tough one. I think I spit it out. I'm not sure.
Well, I think he probably appreciated it as well. But I think, the bigger thread, which I think is not emphasized enough with younger sellers these days, is that, well, I published an article a few years ago, like this topic. I'm a bicycle racing fan, I'm a bike rider, and the team that was winning the Tour de France repeatedly, Sky at that time, Sky Team Sky, now Ineos, managed by a guy named Dave Brailsford, has this theory they called the aggregation of marginal gains. And his theory was that there's nothing too small that won't have an impact on the outcome of the race, especially a race like the Tour de France over 3 weeks, where oftentimes the margin of victory between first and second place could be like 20 seconds spread out over 2,100 miles. So you're talking about, every day, just the slightest of advantage. And so they look at everything. And I've always approached sales the same way, is you just don't know what's going to make the difference. And you have to assume, I believe, that the difference between winning and losing is really small. So everything can make a difference. And if that's the case, then you need to be thoughtful about everything you do as opposed to being lazy and complacent with your language.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing Lance Armstrong, one of his nicknames is Millimeter Lance or something, where he would look for one of these little marginal changes, whether it was like a slight seat adjustment or, pedal stroke or something like that. And
an extra 10 milligrams of EPO or something.
Well, that too. There's that marginal gain.
That's right.
Well, I was introduced to a book called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? I think that's the name of the title.
Oh, interesting.
And it's about the Olympic rowing team from the UK. And it's somewhat similar, I guess, to what you're alluding to from the Sky Team cycling.
Yeah.
Where they're just looking like, okay, the question is, if we make this change or do this thing, will it make the boat go faster? If not, we're not going to do it. If yes, then let's at least give it a try.
Yeah. Well, I think I assume they do the same thing at Brailsford, which was, both good and bad, right? What can we take away? What can we add? But we just look at everything and assume everything makes a difference. And I think too many sellers have gotten away from that, thinking about everything can make a difference. You can laugh, as some people did at me, and saying, this one guy was trolling me pretty hard throughout that whole thread about being emotionally unintelligent, blah, 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 blah. But I think he sort of missed the thread as well, is that, everything makes a difference. Don't assume. And so, I was brought up that way in sales, is just think about everything. Because then there's been some research done on this. Some guys from Harvard, or they published in Harvard Business Review. I forget which school they're from. I think it might have been Harvard, but did a study of sales and found that the differences between winning and losing are so unquantifiable, really, that if you assume that something is acceptable to somebody else, it's probably a mistake.
That's interesting. I'd love to get a copy of that or know what that study is to read it.
Yeah. I'll try to dig it up. It's
I'm sure I could dig around enough for it.
Yeah, the concept is around tie breaking, right? So I think they may have called it something like tie breaking selling or whatever. But yeah, if we're in an environment as we are, let's take sales tools, for instance, for SaaS companies, which are 100 new ones introduced every day. If you're a customer and you're trying to make a decision about which ones to buy, is the fact is they pretty much all do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your decision come down to? And how do you quantify when you look at a deal? And I love to ask this question of sellers as we'll do a deal review. I said, so how much did you win by? They go, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what was your margin of victory? Were you 1% better, 2%, 10%? Well, it's unquantifiable. You can't, we have no way of knowing how much better we were because, this collective decision made with all the stakeholders for a variety of motivations, yada, yada, yada. And it's sort of just try to reinforce the point is that, let's look at everything you do because that could be the thing that makes the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know. And Daniel Kahneman did some work on this, what he calls the peak end rule, which says that when people go through an experience and look back on it to make a decision about it, they really factor 2 points. One is what the peak experience was in that experience, or the peak event in that experience, and the last event. And so in my second book, I wrote about that in context of sales. And I think it's absolutely true is you can't assume going into it, as most sellers do, that you know exactly what that peak event is going to be.
I think I heard him interviewed on Tyler, was it Tyler Cohen's podcast where he talked about this?
Could have been.
Yeah, it was an economics podcast, but I remember him talking about this experience and the idea like I could go on vacation, have a fabulous vacation in the Greek islands. And then as I'm checking out of my hotel, if the person checking me out is rude to me, that, as you said, would be the last thing that I remember, ignoring the last 2 weeks I spent gloriously bathing in the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah, I mean, Barry Schwartz wrote about that specific example, except I think he used Hawaii in his book, The Paradox of Choice, which is a great book to read as well. But when you think about it in sales, and not to preempt our conversation, but in the context I wrote about it in my second book is that you may find that following up on a lead quickly, an inbound lead quickly, is the peak event. I gave the example of a software company I'd worked with in New England. It's now pretty big. They were looking for basically a resume management system because they're being flooded with the resumes. And their VP of sales came in and scoured the internet, came up with a bunch of solutions, narrowed down to 3, sent emails to all 3 saying, hey, I want you to call me. I want a salesperson to call me. We need this. This is exactly what we need. And in a week, no one had called. He said to me, if just one of them had called, we would have bought from them. I've had the opposite example. I've worked with clients and we've implemented systems where prioritize following up inbound leads, transformed the company from the sales perspective because there's such a huge impact on somebody because we've conditioned, or at least we had until recently, conditioned prospects not to expect follow-up, or certainly not personalized follow-up. So it was just little things like that. I mean, people want to predict what's important and what's not. And the point being is you really can't predict what's important. So you have to bring your A game every time you interact with a prospect to have the opportunity to.
So I have 2 questions, I guess, that come to mind related to this. One is it that sellers have really changed and gotten less mindful of the work that they're doing? Or is it just, it's sort of like, back in the olden days, when you and I were, when I was selling textbooks and I had a payphone was my phone, basically.
Yeah.
Have people really changed, or is it just become exasperated because we're older and we feel like this next gen?
No, it's not the people. It's the way we train them and focus them. Yeah, I think sellers are as good today as they were when we're doing, but it's the environment we put them in and what we tell people about what's important. I was just sort of writing a rant that I may post on LinkedIn this week about, yet again, some sales thought leaders saying relationships in sales are unimportant. And the point is not that you need to be friends with people, but you de facto have a relationship with the buyer. If you just look at the definition of a relationship, it's the manner in which two things are connected. So by virtue of being connected to a buyer to help them make a purchase decision, you have a relationship. And that relationship needs to be nurtured. And because it's where the trust flows from. Do you need to be likable? No, you don't need to be likable. But I don't know why you wouldn't be likable. What's it cost you to be likable? It costs you absolutely nothing to be likable. And I give the example. I said, it's because people have an opinion of you, right? I mean, decision making works. If you've read Herman Simon's work on bounded rationality, people work on two levels. They work on both the personal and the corporate level. People have an opinion of you. They have a perception of you, and it factors into their decision. And to the point, this one person is saying is all the customer cares about is sales acumen. My rebuttal would be well, you could have sales acumen likable, and if you are, you're going to win way more often than the unlikable asshole. I mean, right? I mean, this guy who could be perfectly talented. It's not a zero-sum game, and people that are jerks win business too. But it's all about increasing your odds of winning the business. And so I think this is part as managers and as trainers we've gotten away from is saying, look, and it's not the fault of the sellers, it's what are you doing to increase your odds of winning this business? And everything is important, right? You have to consider everything is important. And that's the part I think that's not emphasized and that we're handicapping sellers. It's not the seller's fault at all.
The relationship piece that you just talked about is particularly poignant because earlier today, we had a coaching call with our group, and one of the CEOs in our group is talking about how he's got this very large enterprise deal that he's working, and he said it's gotten to the point now where we're doing daily calls.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so what you've done is you've gone from selling to project management.
Mm-hmm.
And he laughed. He's like, yeah, that's the way it feels. I'm basically like giving deliverables to them, and I'm promising stuff, and we're trying to figure out who does what next, and we're just every day knocking stuff off.
Right.
And to your point, if he doesn't have a relationship with that person, are they going to do the things that he needs them to do in order for them to move forward?
Right.
Because in enterprise sales,
Exactly.
It's complex. We need to get things, like what kind of systems are you using? Can we get a sample data file? Can
Mm-hmm.
we talk to Bob over in IT to figure out if he's got a window to work on this implementation? And those are social points, if you will, that get used internally. And
Mm-hmm.
that person on that buyer on the other side needs to be willing to spend that social capital for you in order to get the deal.
Exactly. Yeah, and people don't, again, that's another thing that we're not training people to be as mindful about. And I think in the SaaS world, my feeling is that we've become so enamored of the technology that we're just not emphasizing these things enough. Because quite honestly, in a lot of companies, they're just playing the odds. Right? If I put enough stuff in the top of the funnel, I know my conversion rates are, I'll get a certain number of things out. But it's a business, one thing that pains me the most is just how low the win rates are on qualified opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Some companies just don't care, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's not sustainable for most companies. They don't play in infinite markets like some of the unicorns, and they have to be better at the middle part of the funnel, at the real selling part, right? So again, I think a lot of it's just a matter of emphasis. And I think just even to the point of, I was sort of socialized in sales is that my job was to help somebody make a purchase decision. I've stood in front of rooms on sales kickoffs with large SaaS companies, brand name SaaS companies, and asked, okay, what's your job as sales? To sell something. Well, on one hand, that's valid. On the other hand, it shapes your perspective about what you're doing when you go out to talk with people. And I think I'm of the opinion that basically in the world, most everybody is sort of similarly skilled and similarly intelligent. And what differentiates people is really their mindset and perspective. And so if you think, look, shifting my heading 2 to 3 degrees this way because I think my job is to help somebody make a purchase decision, completely changes how you're received by the buyer, as opposed to, I'm here to persuade you to buy my stuff. It's little things like that, right? We're not, and I think we get too hung up because of, we now have the tools to market differently than before. We get so hung up in the hype about transformation and so on. And sellers would be much better served to think about, how do I just get 1% better, right? How do I just get a little bit better right now? And if I can do that and sustain that and get a little bit better the next time, then that's a sustainable performance improvement plan as opposed to the promises of transformation. And so for me, I want to teach people these different perspectives that I think are really important. And I think that people would be better off in the long run in their careers to continue to sort of focus on that. Is I'm not going to remake myself. I'm just going to get better.
Well, my experience has been when you really sit down with, take a startup CEO or a sales manager that's taking this very, call it batch and blast approach or spray and pray, right? Lots of emails loaded into Outreach or Sales Loft, whatever. Let my SDRs give them a big list, let them run. When you sit down and really talk to them, you kind of get them behind the proverbial closed doors. They will tell you, I know it's not right. Like and I've even had, founders, for example, tell me like it just doesn't, it feels spammy when I have to do outbound. And I tell people, well, it's probably that's if it feels wrong, you're probably doing it wrong.
Exactly right.
And so I think most people at least have an awareness, even if they can't articulate it in this way, like they know they should be doing something different. Yet behaviorally, it is hard to get people to change because you've got these, pro formas and spreadsheets and investors and numbers you've got to hit. And it's sort of like, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, somebody says, I should probably lose 20 pounds, but I'm just going to wait until after the holidays. And then I want to
get in shape before I go to the gym.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I'd love to go running, but I have to get in shape first.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is it? Why do you feel like in your experience, people that I think, and to your point, I think most people are reasonably intelligent and smart people and they know what's right and wrong. They don't like getting spammy, crappy form emails and LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Why don't people change? What is hard about that to just look at this and go like, we're just going to do 1% better this week or 10% better this month?
Well, I think it takes a certain level of courage in the environment that you talked about. And this is not courage on the order of going into battle or being a police officer or something. It's courage on the order of saying, look, this isn't going to be easy, but this is the right thing to do. And I think that a couple things are at play. One, you mentioned it, is the environment, certainly in the SaaS world that so many startups get into, where the expectations are, we're going to give you money, here's the playbook, right? You're going to go do that. And then there's sort of the fear of missing out, because there are counterexamples of companies that are doing this, playing the odds, as I talked about, that are succeeding. And it's sort of hard to go back to your investor and say, well, I think company XYZ, even though they're really doing well, are doing it wrong. And that's hard. So I think that manager needs to be able to stand up, or an individual seller needs to be able to stand up and say, I think there's a better way to do this. And it's going to seem counterintuitive because, I'm not going to go in and pitch our product. We're going to go in and ask how we can help them solve a problem, even if we're not the solution, for instance. I mean, that's hard because people want to come in, they're trained to go in and pitch. Now it's like, well, what if we change that and say, trained to go in and ask a question you don't know the answer to?
What would you say to a founder or a sales manager that says, like, okay, you're getting me to come around on this, but I have to sell my team. If I'm a sales VP, I have to sell my CEO on this idea of adjusting the strategy. Or if I'm a founder, I've got to sell my board or my investors on why it might take 18 months to grow the next million instead of 6 months because we're not going to batch and blast. What would you tell that person in terms of, they say, like, I want to get this courage and I want to stop playing the odds. What would you tell them how would you tell them?
It's just telling the truth, right? I mean, because one of the things is the difference between, in sort of gross terms, building a promotion versus building a company, if you're a founder. And, what's your goal? If you're just building it to exit and you want to, it's like the old, back in the early internet days, capturing eyeballs, right? And all we cared about, the only metric was eyeballs. But, transferring that into the SaaS world, if you just want to exit, and a lot of companies do, I'm not criticizing that at all. But if you want to build a company, then you have to build a sustainable sales model. And the dynamics in terms of the percentage of startups that succeed or fail hasn't changed as a result of, the current specialized sales model we use. You ask an investor, 4 are trash, 4 are okay, and 2 are winners. So this model hasn't changed things. So let's try a different one.
I never thought about it that way, and that we have all of these, to your point earlier, like how many new sales tools are there launched every day. We've all seen the marketing sales infographic with the logos are so small, you need a microscope.
Yeah. Well, it's like 5,000 MarTech tools now.
Yeah, 5,000 MarTech tools. So we've had all of those, this explosion, literal explosion in the last 5 to 10 years. And we've had the specialization of roles, SDRs, AEs, account managers, CS, sales engineers. And yet, despite all of these perceived innovations to how we sell, to your point, at the end of the day, there has been no marginal change in success or failure rates.
Yeah. So let's try something else. I mean, maybe the solution is we're not specialized enough. Justin Roth-Marsh in his book, The Machine, makes a compelling case that we could be more specialized. What if every time you got to a discovery stage, you called in your discovery expert who wasn't an AE and wasn't an SDR, but was part of the discovery team, or we had a qualification team that got really serious because if you're only winning 1 out of every 5 of your most qualified opportunities, you've got a real qualification and discovery issue. So, let's have specialists for qualification. I've been advocating for that. I've been advocating for, why do we expect managers to be coaches? Let's have coaches on staff. We have to change sort of the financial model of what we're going to achieve and when. But if you're a sales organization of any size, I like to use the example of the show Billions. I don't know if you ever watched that.
I know of it. I listened to the podcast that, what's his name, Brian Koppelman.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, in this hedge fund, this high pressure sales environment, one of the key employees is a shrink. So we know mental health, we know mindset is hugely important. Yeah, we have this tradition going in sales is we elevate somebody to a certain position, a CRO or VP of sales. We expect them to be sort of the font of all knowledge, right? That they're an expert in motivation and performance improvement and compensation and sales, all this stuff, which why would they be? They're just a human being. They haven't been trained in any of this stuff. They've got some experience. I'm sure they have opinions, but they're not experts. So why don't we bring in specialists? I use this example a lot, analogy a lot, but you look at professional sports teams. They become increasingly specialized in the coaching staffs and the roles of the people. And I'm a huge soccer fan, so in Premier League soccer, you look at the coaching staffs in those teams. Very specialized. Liverpool has a throw-in coach on the staff, for Christ's sake. A throw-in coach. All right? Why aren't we doing that? We are in a performance-based profession as much as professional sports, where people get compensated on what they achieve. And yet, we assume that a frontline sales manager with 2 years of sales experience and no training is capable of guiding a team to success. There will be exceptional individuals in there that can do that, but by and large, it's a recipe for sort of continued failure, I think, of the way we're experiencing it. And so I think that we just have to be bold on so many levels and rethink what we're doing, training, structure of our organizations, and try something different. Otherwise, we'll just, as I like to say, people like to think there's been this revolution in sales in the last 10, 15 years. And I said there hasn't been a revolution in sales. We just automated the behaviors that we had before, most of which weren't very good. So it's not like we've improved the profession and moved it ahead, and we're sort of now really stuck, I believe, where we are now and not moving forward. And so, I think we need to change how we measure performance. We need to change how we measure productivity, all these things in ways that we're just not prepared to do. And I'm not sure what's holding us back other than it starts at the top. It's not, what's happening today is not the fault of the sellers. It's everything above them.
Yeah. I mean, my perspective on it is that the driving force of this near-term cliff where you're running, especially in the SaaS world, startup world in particular, you've got these funding rounds and you're running out of capital and you've had certain goals. So, investors are pressuring the CEOs are pressuring the teams, and investors are getting pressured by their investors,
their limited
partners. And then even, look at publicly traded, like really large companies, it's the same thing. It's like, what's the stock price and what's the profit margin? And you're constantly driving. And it's painful to take that step back. And it's hard to justify, okay, we're going to take 2 steps back to go 3 forward.
Yeah, but so the problem is that we assume this is the only way it will work. And the fact is, this is just one way. Mm-hmm. And, the genesis starts with Salesforce, and it worked for Salesforce. But it's just one way that worked. Why do we assume it's the only way that will work? I think that pretty safe. I mean, there's no data, unfortunately, to back this up. But I mean, my belief is that individual sales productivity today, as measured by dollars of revenue generated per hour of selling time, is no greater than it was 40 years ago. In fact, arguably, might be worse. And the question is why? Why should it be that way? What are we doing to change it? And, if you look at productivity increases in the economy at large, we had pretty sustained large increases, 3.5% per year up through about the year 2000, 2001, and then it fell off the cliff. And since then, productivity growth has been about 1.5% per year. And, far underperforming the expectations of economists. And Paul Krugman had written about this in the New York Times a couple months ago. That was really interesting. But when I was thinking about that, productivity basically fell off the cliff around the year 2000. So what that's saying is basically the innovations that really drove productivity increases in the 80s and 90s were email and broadband. And once we got beyond that, it hasn't had the impact. And why would we assume that marketing or sales is any different?
All right. Off and running we are in my conversation with Andy Paul. Hope you can tell him that I'm really digging this conversation and why I was so excited to have Andy on the show. And so I'd also be really excited to have you on our email list. If you are not already on our email list, you want to get on the email list because we're doing lots of cool stuff. I got some pretty big plans for people on our email list coming into the next couple of weeks and months. And going forward, we're making some pretty big updates to the way that we're helping you and helping people just like you with ramping up and scaling up their sales process. And so one of the best ways to learn about all the cool stuff that's going to be coming down the pike is to make sure you're on the email list. Easiest way to do that if you're not already is head over to salesqualia, QUALIA.com, salesqualia, QUALIA.com. Right from the homepage, if you haven't already downloaded your personal copy of my latest book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, you can do that and add your email to the form that pops up so we know where to send the book, and that will add you to our email list, of course. If you've already subscribed or already downloaded a copy of the book or purchased a copy of the book, but you haven't added yourself to the email list, you can either request that free copy or just add yourself to the email list. There's another button somewhere there on the homepage. You can do that too. So make sure that we know how to get in touch with each other, because as we're rolling out a number of online events, different trainings, rolling out LinkedIn Lives that we're doing now, as well as new podcast episodes, you want to be the first to know, because there's a lot of good stuff coming your way. But it's only going to come your way if I know where to send it. So that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Andy Paul.
And those increases in productivity, again, I'll just think about my own experience when I was selling college textbooks. It was outside sales, spent a lot of time on campus. So if I was lucky, I would talk to 15 people in a day. That was a good day. Some of those conversations were 2 minutes, somewhere it may have been 30.
Right.
If you add up the total minutes, maybe it's 2 hours of actual sales work. The rest was walking in between appointments, walking to the car, getting copies of books, those kinds of things, driving to and from campus. Versus today, where it's predominantly inside, especially now, more than ever. And so because we have email, which is faster to exchange information, we have productivity tools to automate emails. You're saying that the amount of time I'm spending selling stuff has increased drastically, but we're not seeing the requisite output.
Return. The output, yeah, it seems like. So, yeah, I had a little different. I had a similar experience to that early in my career, where I had a field-based territory in the San Francisco Bay Area selling computers. And then, about 15 years of my career before I started my own company is I was selling large, complex satellite communications networks, worth millions to companies all over the world. But, I didn't go visit them that often, and we couldn't afford to. We're working for startups. So, I was mostly doing virtual selling in today's parlance, right? So, we were just on the phone. So it's like really not a lot different in many respects than what people are doing today. I think people, there's still field sales teams that are field-based that are specifically in the field, but I think it's been quite a while since the majority of teams, even those that would travel occasionally, were primarily a hybrid or virtual model. Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not sure what accounts for it, but I think part of it is that, and this may sound like heresy of the highest order, is, you figure if you've got low win rates, then one of your problems is you have too many prospects. And the answer is have fewer, more targeted prospects that your reps are working. And a challenge I would make to sales managers and sales leaders, say, well, what if we came to you, Mr. Sales Leader, tomorrow and said, look, your quota for next year is going to be the same, but your pipeline coverage ratio can't exceed 2.5x.
And what is pipeline coverage ratio for people?
Oh, so the amount of opportunities in their pipeline that they think they need in order to hit their number for the month. So 5x is 5 times the number of deals I need in order to hit my number.
Got it.
And 5x in the SaaS world is very common.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, we were speaking at an event a year and a half ago where us SaaS sales leaders, I said, yeah, you guys all understand that your win rate is the reciprocal of your pipeline coverage ratio requirement. It's like, oh, I hadn't really thought about it. So what we do is we load people with prospects and say, go work them. Especially with anything with any complexity. If you don't have the time to work them really well, because you have the demand to carry all these deals forward to satisfy a metric for your pipeline, it starts self-defeating. And so I think we just get in these vicious cycles where it's self-perpetuating, is that we don't have time to really work, and we know we're going to convert a certain percentage of them just based on what we do. That's what I talked about earlier, playing the odds. And if we want to grow the company, we focus on increasing the top of the funnel, and we don't really focus on becoming more effective at the bottom. Mm-hmm. I had this conversation with CRO, a very large SaaS company, and we said, so what's your growth strategy? It was just all about increasing lead flow at top of funnel. I said, well, what about increasing your win rate? Be cheaper. If we just, you focused on increasing your win rate from 20 to 22% this year, and next year, 25. You need way fewer prospects over time. And also you don't churn your markets. And that's the other thing that sort of gets me, is if you're operating on it, I'm going to close only one out of every 5 of my most qualified opportunities. Let's say you need to close, as a company, you need to close 20 opportunities in a month. So it means you need to have 100 qualified opportunities in your pipeline. What happens to those 80? Well, so you've activated them for the competition, or they go into hibernation for some period of time, right? There's a half-life that you can't go back and touch them. And unless you're, again, dealing in a really large market, you're creating all this churn in your TAM. You're effectively reducing your TAM at any one point in time. So why not just focus on winning more, right? What can we do better in discovery? What can we better do in needs analysis? What can we do better in qualification to ensure that we, at the end of the day, we win a higher percentage of those opportunities that we qualify?
And I would add to that, as you were describing this ratio, say 80% that you don't win for whatever reason. Just think of it from the buyer's standpoint.
Yeah.
You've gone in and you've spent, we think of it as sellers like, oh, I've spent all that time with that prospect and they didn't buy. Just take for a moment, how do they feel?
Mm-hmm.
They took your call. They did the demo. They got their tech person on the call with your tech person. And they took this, they spent hours and hours and hours in that social capital that we talked about earlier.
Yep.
And they get to the end and it's not a fit for whatever reason, feature, functionality, misunderstanding, limitation, whatever. How are they feeling?
Well,
that sucks for them too.
Oh, it sucks for them big time. But to your point, which is part that I, my ears perked up on, is they got to the end and decided there wasn't a fit. Well, we decide they're not a fit much earlier in the process.
Sure.
That's one way we deal with this. We've got this misallocation of attention, I call it, in sales, where we spend so much time. If you go online and LinkedIn being the primary source and just look at the percentage of content that's created about top of funnel versus discovery, qualification, versus what I call actual selling, right? Because lead gen fundamentally is marketing, right? But we've got conferences, we've got great conferences, we have inbound from HubSpot, we got my friends that put on the outbound conference, yada, yada, yada. And I tell people, I said, we know we're going to be on the right track when next year the conference everybody wants to go to is Discovery and Qualification 2021. Now, when that happens, we're on the right track.
That's funny you say that, because we spent we do a training cycle every in sales training within our program, and July and August we did a 2-part training just on needs analysis and customer discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, what are the frameworks? What questions should you ask? Like, how do you what are ways that you can really assess early if this is a fit? And then this month, yesterday, we actually did a training on business cases.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of felt like the organic chemistry of sales. You sort of like, I mean, even as I'm, delivering this training, and Megan, who does some of our coaching for us, like, she's leading the training and she's like rocking it, and it's great stuff. But even me, who like does this, I'm like, wow, like this is not the same as like the juice you get from, crafting that right email, or the juice you get from like, really kapow that demo. Like this is and I even told clients, like, I'm like, look, this is the guts of enterprise selling. Like, and this is the reason that most people don't figure out how to sell their stuff, because you can get the early customers because maybe it wasn't because of the way you sold, it was in spite of the way you sold. They were going to buy from you anyway.
Well, yes. And that's a great comment, right? Is I think, unfortunately, with the way things currently exist, is I would say the bulk of the time customers buy from you in spite of you, not because of you.
I think we've all had that experience,
Yeah, but that's kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, there's enough.
But I think I think it's largely the case. But to your point about, people aren't being excited about it is I don't know, a year ago I gave a talk 2 nights back to back with AAASP chapters in Providence and Boston. And it was all about discovery. And did the first night in Providence. A bunch of them came the next night to hear it again in Boston, because I think it's just not talked enough about, right? It's to your point, it's sort of green field for a lot of people, and it's not. We want to automate and make everything a process, but it's a unique undertaking with every single prospect, because they are unique individuals, unique people involved, unique perspectives on life and what they're trying to accomplish. So you can't go in with just, hey, here's my 10 questions. I'm going to ask those questions. I mean, you've got to be thoughtful. You've got to be, you're actually thinking about in your questions, you're actually delivering value to the customer through the questions you ask. I mean, you're giving them to think differently, perhaps, about the challenges and the problems they're trying to solve. So the more rote and routine we make it, which is certainly the goal of so many people in sales, is, let's automate this and let's substitute machine judgment for the judgment of the seller. That's problematic.
Well, and that's even just introducing this concept of needs discovery, needs analysis, customer discovery, or even to your point earlier about lead qualification as a step. It's usually, website, request a demo, then they automatically book the demo via Calendly or whatever other tool, and then the rep gets on, is like, great, we got 45 minutes. Let me show you everything we got. And then 45 minutes later, 75 clicks later, then afterwards they're like, great, thanks very much, really appreciate it, and we'll let you know, or send me a proposal, and that's it.
Yeah.
So just getting people to understand, okay, there's actually like 2 or 3 steps between the engagement and the demo. There's qualify, and you probably have to do 2 or 3 or 4 qualification calls with different stakeholders, and then you have to do discovery calls. And oftentimes, and you probably hear this too, it's like the response is like, wow, like that's like a lot of work. It's like a lot of calls. How do I get people to have these conversations with me? And I said, well, for the same reason that you and I, Andy, were just talking about, like, it's to their benefit to spend 30 minutes with you before the demo, so you can understand what their needs and problems are, so that we don't spend 3 months wasting everybody's time. And you've got to be willing, using your word courage, to tell people that. Say, look, I've done my research on your company. You're telling me that you're interested in this product, but frankly, I just don't know if we can solve your problem, because I don't even know what your problem is. So if you could really help me out, it's take 30 minutes for me to ask you some questions, and probably 2 or 3 other people on your team get their perspectives. Then I can know for sure, number 1, can we help you? And number 2, if we can, in that demo that we're going to do next week, I'm going to make sure everything in that demo is exactly matches and shows you how we're going to solve your problem. But it does take courage to in that sense, to like be willing to take control and be willing to get some pushback from the buyers who just want to be able to click request a demo, eat their popcorn, and then be on their way.
If they do, though, right? Because I think that if you look at Gartner's research a couple of years ago on the buyer journey, where they published this flow chart, if you remember seeing it, that was what they call their spaghetti diagram. It's this hugely complex, interwoven mess, spider's nest of web of lines. But hidden in there were 4 jobs that buyers want to accomplish from their research showed, the uniform. And 4 jobs they need to accomplish. They identify the problem, explore potential solutions, finalize the requirements, pick a vendor. And back to this idea about perspective before, is I fully believe the way that we're training sellers today is just to focus on the 4th one of those steps, which is to select a vendor. And I say, well, look at that diagram. You got 4 jobs they need to accomplish. The first 3 jobs are all about how we're going to solve our problem. The 4th job is who we're going to solve it with. And in sales, we need to train our people to be focused on the how, because Gartner's 3rd step they talked about is finalizing requirements. Well, oftentimes that's the case of a buyer's gone through a process. They've identified a bunch of alternatives, ways they could solve their problem. They narrow it down to 2 or 3. They choose the one they think is best. And then they put that in an RFP and provide it to vendors. And you know this. I mean, if you're only on the receiving end of the RFP and it's got my fingerprints all over it, your odds of winning are really low. But this is what the perspective of I'm willing to bet most of our sellers are today, is my job is to go get that order. I'm going to focus on being selected as the vendor. And so then, if that's the case, at that point in time, they consider what they're doing is persuasion, right? I'm going to rely on persuasion. And my counter to that is, well, what if we worked on answering the how part of the equation? And what we want to do is we want to influence the choice they're going to make about what's their preferred solution. Now, if we do that, when it gets to vendor selection, I just increase my odds significantly. So Forrester had a study that came out about sometime in the last 7-8 years, somewhat along the lines of this, is saying, look, if you're the vendor that provides the seller their vision, their buying vision, basically, their vision of what it is they're going to buy, the outcomes they can achieve with it, then your odds of winning are like at 65%. Who wouldn't take a 65% bet, right? I would, all the time.
Yeah.
But we train people that your job is persuasion. That's not your job. Your job is really influencing. And this is, different perspective, but this is the way we're training people. And I get, friends that get mad at me that are sales trainers when I say the trouble with sales training is it just doesn't work. And it's not because, it's because we're really focused on the wrong thing, right? Yeah, we can get people we can do role play and get people really good at making initial calls and so on. But to the point you and I were talking about earlier, that's not really where the action takes place. We need to do that. We need to be good at getting leads for sure, whether it's inbound, outbound. But you've got people with dramatically different opinions about what percentage should be originated where. Smart people. So it's like, okay, find what works for you. But at the end of the day, you got to get good at selling. And if you're not good at selling, that's a problem.
Andy, I got to tell you, I wasn't sure exactly what the conversation was going to be, but this is exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's fun. I shouldn't come on podcasts, so I've been writing rants for LinkedIn in the morning, but I was loaded for bear.
No, it's. I think it's really timely because there's a lot of, I think it's just like general fatigue out there. I mean, I personally feel it. We're all weighing the last 6 months of shutdown and COVID. Everybody's still pushing forward. The goal line. Those cliffs we're talking about haven't changed. And I think we're just like you said, to your point, it's like the productivity has gone down. Everybody's working really damn hard, right?
Yep.
But hard work isn't necessarily what's going to get people to change. And I think I do feel like there's an opportunity to reset the game, so to speak, with your prospects and say, look, we're going to try something new. I've heard this from many different people. Like, hey, if you're ever going to shift the way you do business, now would be the time, right?
That's a good point. Great point.
Now you have an opportunity to say, we're going to rewrite the rules. And we have a client who, as a startup, oftentimes faces challenges in terms of like, hey, you're just a startup and we're not sure if you guys have a real process here. And additionally, they're selling to banks. So banks have a very old way of buying stuff. And they were getting very frustrated in their sales process because they couldn't keep control the way they wanted to.
Right.
And they turned it around and they actually wrote what they called their rules of engagement. And it's in a sense almost like a manifesto that they're sharing with their prospects and saying like, this is how we work. Like,
love it.
We don't do demos unless we understand your needs.
Love it.
Sales is a team sport. So you're not just work with me, you're going to work with our CEO, you're going to work with our CTO. They basically built these rules out and they're sharing that with their prospects.
No, I love that.
And it feels like it does take some courage to do it because, actually every customer that they get is a big deal because they're a startup. But it's an opportunity I think we all have to, if you're going to make this change, if we all know in our gut, like the batch and blast and the way we've been doing it, it just isn't going to get us to where we really want to go.
Right.
Now's the time, I think.
Yeah, really I agree 100%. I mean, something else that is, just sort of got me today is reading something about somebody saying, it's settled. Sales is a science. And unfortunately, the science most people refer to as really just math, right? Conversion rate. It's just math. And it's no science. So to your point is unfortunately in sales, we don't have a lot of large double-blind studies about the effectiveness of techniques and so on and so forth. We've got behavioral economics and theory that everybody takes for gospel. But what they found was 60% of people do things in this way. Well, what about the other 40% we sell to, right? I mean, if we take everybody as sort of this blanket, we're going to miss opportunities. So experiment, try something new. I love this idea with this company you're talking about is this is how we want to engage, and buyers will eat it up. Because why do buyers talk to sellers? It's not because they want to, it's because they have to. Think about it. If they don't need to, they won't. You look at Gartner's diagram with this complex buying journey. I challenge people, find the word sales on there. It shows up once in the far deep right-hand corner, late into the game. That's it. Because they're sort of saying, well, if we're not getting value from you, we'll just sort of go without you. But they want to talk to you because they have to. They need you. They need validation. They need insight that you have. They need the questions that you're asking. They don't know what they don't know. And so it really gives you an opportunity to set the rules of engagement as this one company is doing. And I think that's fantastic. I mean, more people should say, what's our philosophy? What are we trying to accomplish? What does that look like? How does it mirror, or it doesn't have to completely align, but how does it align to how customers buy? Because I can tell you, since Gartner thing has come out 2 years ago, I've talked to hundreds of companies, guests on the show, and so on, and conversation around, well, so how have you changed your sales process? Given what Gartner talked about, the customer's buying journey, not at all, right? Hasn't changed at all, an iota. Well, that's a problem. So I love that. That's a great thing. I like to see what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think the data out there, I mean, I've seen different versions of the percentages, but something like 65% of the buying happens or the research happens before contacting the sellers, right? So to your point, buyers try to avoid salespeople. There is a point in the process where they know they have to at some point engage because the salesperson is useful. There's information, there's perspectives. Now, as soon as your usefulness expires, that's where people go dark on you. Right? They will only keep you around so long as you are useful to
exactly.
them. And as soon as you're useful, is like once you've done the demo, once you've shared everything, once you've sent the proposal, and they think that there is no more additional information that they need, they're done with you.
Yeah, I mean, I came up with the term in my first book. I said return on time invested, and buyers calculate that on every interaction they have with you. Was this a good use of my time? I invested some of my time in you, the seller. Did I get anything of value in return that would then justify continuing to give you my time? And again, there's been some study done on that. Herbert Simon, again, did some work on that, is how busy people choose to allocate slices of their attention when they're overwhelmed. And he wrote this 20 plus years before the internet came around. And what they found is, people make an economic calculation. What am I going to get the biggest return on the investment of my time? And this is still a decision our busy, overwhelmed prospects are making today is, if I invest time in you, am I going to get a return? Is that worth investing additional time with you? If it is, you get more time. And I've had that perspective for years, and I was selling is like, very conscious of the fact, and part was driven by the fact that I was working for startups and we were traveling a lot overseas, is I had to justify to my boss that the travel was worth it, right? And then it sort of dawned on me as well, justified to him, I have to justify it to the customer as well, that I was worth them taking the time. So that sort of opened my eyes to this idea. It's like, oh yeah, we got to make sure this is really worth their while.
Yeah, I've done those same calculations as I remember when I was at Altos Research, going to New York to meet with the Wall Street crowd that was buying their data or prospects. And I would purposely take the red eye. It was, saving time. I could just land at JFK, go into the bathroom and shave,
get
my clothes, go right, into a cab first meeting. And it was just like, I don't have a lot of time, first of all. And if I take the red eye, I don't have to pay for a hotel room for that night. So it was like saving money there. And like, oh, the Red Roof Inn over on 34th Street, that'll work.
Yeah, you'd wouldn't want to stay there. But yeah. No, we did something similar. I was at one point in my career, all my customers were the Wall Street crowd. All the information providers on Wall Street were my customers. And we'd get in the routine. We'd leave San Francisco, SFO. American had a 4 p.m. flight. And so you get in at midnight. I'd get to my hotel, and then we'd wake up at dark 30 and spend all day. Then I'd catch the 6 o'clock flight home the next day.
I would do that too. I would basically spend 2 full days in New York, but only have to pay for 1 hotel room. Take the red eye, 2 days of meetings, and then stay until the last 9 o'clock flight from New York PM. So that way I could work all the way up till 6 p.m. meetings on that second day. And squeeze as much as I could into those 2 days.
Yeah, no,
I return on time invested.
I wish I were nostalgic about those days, but I'm really not, though.
I'm not either.
I had a route going to Asia where I'd go to Asia for a week and only be like 4 nights in a hotel. I'd leave on Saturday night. You arrive late Sunday over there, and then I'd have 2 red eyes somewhere in there, flying from like Hong Kong to Australia, and then back from Australia back. I was like,
and then you lose, and then you get the day.
Yeah, and lose the day. Yeah, it's just like. Yeah, I don't miss that.
But. Yeah, I don't miss that either. Well, you mentioned Herbert Simon, just to wrap up here, on my shelf.
There you go.
You mentioned Down to Rationality. Yeah. You mentioned him earlier, and I took a peek over my shelf because I was pretty sure I had this one. There's a couple of books. There's another one. This book is really good if you haven't come across it. Charles Perrow, Complex Organizations.
Yeah, I'll have to read that one. A
whole bunch of essays about complexity of organizations. It's been a topic of interest of mine over the years, just organizational psychology. I felt like if I ever was going to go back and get a PhD, that would be the topic, because it's just really fascinating to me how companies make decisions.
Yeah, well, there's another guy, if you've read any of his stuff, Paul Nutt.
Oh, I haven't come across it.
So, and he's the Heath brothers, in one of their books, I think Decisive it was, talked about him at length, and I've read some of his stuff, which when it comes to decision making, I think is so powerful, because he's done lots. I think he's still alive. He's an emeritus at Ohio State. But he said that the way companies make decisions is that, and it sort of tracks right to the Gartner thing, is what they do is they decide they've got this problem, they define the problem, and then they define options for solving the problem. And then they choose that option and then decide, okay, based on having chose this option, who are we going to work with to solve it? And so there's this bifurcation between the how and the who. But what he said that I found fascinating is that in his studies, in 71% of the cases when organizations are making decisions, that the decision makers were given only 2 choices to make. So you think about that from a sales perspective. 71% of the cases, it's you or nothing, basically. And so if you can't win in that situation, if you can't win competing against the status quo, then you don't know how to sell your product. Or your product has a product market fit issue or whatever. But that's hugely powerful. Think about it. 71% of the cases, it's down to you or staying still.
That is a big number.
Yeah.
I have to find some of that research.
Yeah, lots of good stuff out there. And it's just, it doesn't like it has to be complicated, but I think for sellers, this is what the value of continuing to read and learn and listen to podcasts and so on is. You begin to understand that, for all the sort of superficial complexity, I think the beauty of like the Gardner diagram was it's really pretty simple at heart. There's 4 jobs the customer needs to get done. And it doesn't matter how big the customer is, they're going to go through these same 4 steps, and they're going to go through them in order. I mean, they may start one of the steps before they completely finish the one before, but they're not going to complete step 2 before they've completed step 1. And so, there's sort of a logical way that they go through this, the helter-skelter of all the other lines notwithstanding. But if you just focused on the right thing, you have the right perspective. My customer's trying to get these 4 jobs done. How do I help them do that? And I sort of summarize by saying, what a buyer wants to do, very simple. Your buyer's objective, not their objective in terms of what they want to achieve with what they're purchasing, but their objective in their buying process is to quickly gather information to make a good decision with the least investment of time and resources. And this sort of plays back to Simon again, because this is about making the good enough decision. Yep. The satisficing as he talks about.
Yep.
Because we all have these 3 constraints on all the decisions we make. And that's what companies do. And if you know that ahead of time, then you say, well, how am I trying to help them achieve this task? And it's by going through these 4 steps. It's really, as my first boss told me, selling is simple. It's not easy, but it is simple. And it still is pretty simple. It's not easy. It hasn't gotten any easier at all. But what people are trying to achieve is pretty straightforward. And if you have the right perspective about how you help them, it increases your odds of succeeding.
Well, listen, Andy, I think I want to be respectful of your time. I'd love to do a part 2 or 3 or 4.
Let's do. Yeah, love it. Love it.
In the future. So I know speaking of podcasts, you've got a podcast, the Sales Enablement podcast with Andy Paul, which I think has like 800 plus episodes at this point.
Yeah, 821 as of today.
821. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned your 2 books. So the first one is Zero Time Selling, 10 Essential Steps to Accelerate Every Company Sales. And then the second book is Amp Up Your Sales, Powerful Strategies that Move Customers to Make Fast, Favorable Decisions.
Yeah. I mean, the similar themes, right? It's I'm a huge believer that in sales, you want to excel at the things you have complete control over. And so one of those things, and sort of forms the heart of the first book and the second one to some degree, is this idea of responsiveness in sales, right? We can control that. I can't control the product. I can't control the pricing. But boy, I can control how responsive I am. And responsive, not just meaning fast. I mean, I have a specific definition of it, which is providing value at speed. Mm-hmm. Because if a customer asks me a question and I can't answer it, then I'm not being responsive, right? If I get back to them, I don't have an answer for the question, I wasn't responsive. Doesn't matter how fast I got back to them. So it's coming back with value or complete answers in as quick a time as possible. And there's been some studies, and I just saw one recently. I forget who it was by, but the top 6 things buyers wanted, responsiveness was on the list of the top 6 things they wanted. This is not new, right? Is when I talk about buyers want to quickly gather information, is when a company sets out to make a purchase decision about something, they're not given unlimited time to do it, right? I mean, they're not going to spend a year to make a decision on something they could make in 6 months if they were given the information they need. And so it's a huge competitive advantage as a seller to integrate this responsiveness into your process. And you as an individual can do that. For me, it's been huge throughout my entire career. Somebody that's a non-technical person selling in hugely complex technical areas. Yeah, the human element of it was really important, and responsiveness is really, really key. So I talk about that in both books, because it's just, to me, it's, if you're a seller and you're not focused on it, you're missing a bet. It's a real important tool for you.
And doesn't require any expert training to just be
no, just do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just remember one customer. I was actually on an airplane when they called, which was always my worst fear, because I wanted to be able to return calls. And this was before there was internet on the airplanes widely. And I got off the plane, I call the prospect, and they were just amazed. Right? It'd been like 2 hours. But I always start off with this apology. I say, I'm sorry it took so long to get back to you. And they're like, no one ever calls me back.
Right.
And it's something people could think about is, when you call people back, you respond to people, start it off with just, hey, I'm sorry it took so long to get back to you. You're really setting the bar for yourself at that point.
I love this. This is really great stuff, Andy. Thank you so much for taking the time to share a lot of this. I've taken so many notes on my iPad. You probably see me scratching stuff down.
That's fine.
So we'll definitely do our best to summarize this and share those notes. So you can, if you would like to share this episode once it gets published out with
absolutely. Yeah.
Folks on LinkedIn.
It's been a lot of fun.
if there's anything we can do to help with your podcast, or certainly we'll add a link to it in our show notes as well as links to your book.
Well, we'll get you on our show too.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 800 and something.
That's fine. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it. You can book me as number 1,000. You just put me in the calendar.
Yeah. Well, let's see. At the rate we produce, 150 a year. So
okay,
it'll be a little over a year, but I'm on the hook for it. So you'll get that.
I know that one's open. So
yeah. We'll have to. That's true. I think, gosh, may have to auction that one off.
Exactly. Right? It's going to be amazing. That's why I said it.
I have to pick a date for that one. Let's see. Yeah, that's going to be. Oh gosh, roughly it'll be about New Year's 2022. Interesting. Okay.
I wonder how the world will change by then.
Yeah.
Well, let's not make that the next time that we speak. So
no. Yeah, I look forward to doing this again. And
thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you just diving in and having that conversation. Sometimes I have a certain topic in mind, and other times I just like to riff. And this is one of the most enjoyable podcast episodes I've done.
Oh, thank you. Well, this is a lot of fun. I enjoy chatting sales with people that are interested and curious about it, and like me, I think is like, how do we change things, right? And I do think the biggest disservice that we're doing to sellers today, and again, it's not the seller's fault necessarily, is, I say sort of the irony of the SaaS world. I don't focus only on SaaS, but I mean, just such a big part of what we do. I said, the irony of the SaaS world is these companies were all created to disrupt a market of some sort, yet they rely on the most rigid compliance-based sales processes that you can find, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And
that's a really good point.
And it's like, the sellers, I just, on last Friday, the episode of my podcast, it was my first sales manager. We hadn't connected in like 30 years. He reconnected with me a few months ago. I said, hey, got to get you on the show. And he was a great guy. I mean, I learned a ton from him, even though he was only a couple of years older than I am. But the theme that I always had, and early in my career, both when I was managing people, but also because the managers I was working for, was how do I help you become the best version of you?
Mm-hmm.
And that emphasis, I think, has fallen off quite a bit. We want people to stay inside the process, color inside the lines. And I think that doesn't develop great sellers. Yeah. And so, people need to be empowered to speak up, to say no, say, I've got a better way to do it. You want me to make 50 calls? Look, give me 60 days or give me 90 days. I'm only going to make 30 calls a day. I'm only going to make 20 calls a day. But I'm going to crush my number. If I do that, you're going to leave me alone. And that's what I did in my career. Is like, I can't do that. I'm an introvert. I hated cold calling. I did as much as I could early on to get through that stage of my career so I could get trained for the next product. But it's, you need to do it. You need to have leads, and I've done it my entire career. But I've always done it my way, right? I've always had much thinner pipelines than probably made some of my bosses comfortable, but we always crushed our numbers. Because if I had a prospect and there's an opportunity and qualified, then we were going to win it. But people don't feel like they have that opportunity to speak up these days.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel constrained and repressed, and by having to make 50 calls and send 50 emails and blah, 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 set X meetings. And it's like, let's do something different. Speak up. This is back to the courage thing, right? I mean, it's, your sales manager is going to be wetting their pants if you get too many people say they want to do it, but you hit their numbers, they won't be wetting their pants. And that's, so you have to take the responsibility, right? If you're going to make that, and you have to have this little bit of courage to say, I think there's a better way to do it based on what I've done so far, then do it. And I actually think more managers, if you find one or two that have the guts to let people do it, it'll catch on. And you still have a process, but the process doesn't have to be geared to, your playbook doesn't have to be geared to the quantity of things you're doing, right?
Yeah.
It's only an opportunity. That's your playbook. Just get them in the process.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
No, but I was just saying, this ties back to why I'm trying to get younger people thinking outside the box about what we do in this business.
Yeah, I've thought about sales processes like as you would a code base, right? You just want to build a really strong core code base, and then you go find really great engineers to build on top of that.
Yeah.
And it should be the same. You're not going to be overly prescriptive. If you go hire that rock star engineer that's going to come help you build your product, are you going to tell that person exactly how to code? No, of course
exactly.
not. That's why you hire the engineer to do it. Same with product, right?
But but you don't see that as much anymore.
Yeah.
You had a reputation, I've talked about this on my show before, but one manager, would always come to me and say, well, this is what I think you should do. And I always say, well, okay, well, let me think about it. and finally said, don't you ever say yes to anything? I said, no. I said, my butt's on the line. You can give me this advice. And if I don't think it's going to work for me and I go execute it and I fail, who gets fired, me or you? I do. So no, I'll come up with a way that I want to do that I think makes sense. That'll help give us a better chance of succeeding. Yeah, I'm not you. And that was just, I guess I was fortunate to have managers that gave me enough rope to hang myself, but it never happened that way. Just, you have to just be thoughtful about it and be creative about it. And, like I said, I just never accepted, maybe it's because I'm a child of the 60s and we're told to question authority, but I did. And I think we need more people to question authority because it's not serving them. Some people, maybe it is, but if it's not serving you, is have the guts to speak up and do something different and take a risk.
Well, let me know what else, if you need some more, if you're open to some help with that group that you're talking about, I'd love to.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
There's a couple other people that came to mind as you were speaking. Another guy, Ernest Owusu, who's
actually,
Ernest.
Yeah, Ernest and I've had to reschedule twice on my podcast. We're going to talk on Friday. Okay. This was last Friday.
Show. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah,
super smart.
Yeah. I have to admit, I was first impressed when we logged on to Zoom yesterday. I had to tell him that unfortunately I'd had a conflict. I had to reschedule. I'm like, God, you look so young, especially for a college football lineman and an NFL lineman. It's like, expect somebody to look more beaten up, but
oh man, he looks great.
He looks fantastic, and especially with three kids at home. So
good genes.
Yeah. So Ernest definitely want to talk to, and anybody else you think of? And
I'll think of some folks.
I'd love to talk about cooperating. It's just a passion project for mine, and my goal is to get people to write their first book and to get it published. And because I'm a huge believer that long form thought leadership is still the most powerful. And
I agree. I put together 3 books. The third one almost drove the stake in me. It took me a while to get it done. And I've got 2 more that I've already outlined, and I just need to make the time to write them. It's the thing. I mean, it's one of the things I just naturally enjoy. It's
me too.
Writing brings some joy, and can't wait for Phil's Coffee to open up again so I can get back there at 6 in the morning.
Get back and write. Yeah.
Do my writing.
Well, I been working on my third one about a year, which is much longer than I thought. Because usually I only take about 3 months to write a book, but with COVID, everything got. Actually, the first draft wasn't nearly what I wanted it to be. So, which was last January, I finished that. So basically, I've rewritten it. And I'm supposed to be finishing in about 2 weeks, but it'll probably be a couple more after that. But I love it. So I'm trying to get my next one done. And it's all about this difference between persuasion and influence, basically. So, which I think is just a perspective people need to have.
All right, that's it. I could spend hours with this guy, Andy. Really good dude. Really excited to have a chance to talk to him. I hope you learned a lot. I sure did. These are the kinds of conversations that I think are important, outside of the day-to-day tactical stuff that you're probably thinking about every single day. How do I get more leads? How do I convert more of those leads into opportunities? How do I do my demos? How do I hire? When do I hire? How do I raise capital? All those things that are happening each and every day. I think it's critical for all of us, regardless of how experienced you are selling your product as a sales leader or as a company founder, that we take some time to take a few steps above what we're doing every day, get out of the business, look at the business from up a high and see how it's really operating and get a sense for what that system is that we want to build and how we should be building it, what's working, what's not working. And conversations like this, I hope will help stretch your thinking, help you get you some new perspectives, and help you identify some gaps and some opportunities in your own sales process. So that's why we do what we do. Beyond the podcast, obviously, we can help you in lots of other different ways. I mentioned earlier about getting on the email list. If you're a B2B, business to business tech company, and you're in that seed stage, or approaching that A round, or you've just recently closed an A round, and you're already on that race to the B round, and you're looking for ways to build a more repeatable sales process, get more predictability in the way that you are running your sales and your sales organization. And ultimately, what you want to get to, of course, is a place of scalability. Then there's a pretty good chance that the team and I here at Sales Quality can help you out. So if you want to learn more about what we might be able to do to help you out, best thing to do is just shoot me an email, Scott, SCOTT, at salesqualia, QUALIA.com. You can just write the word private in the subject line, and that just lets me know you want to have a private conversation. What we'll do is schedule in a quick 15, 20-minute call so I can learn more about your situation to figure out if or how I can help you out. If I can't, for whatever reason, or the team and I are not the good fit for you, then I'll point you in the right direction. But if it does look like we are able to help you out based on your situation, we'll schedule in some more time and talk about how that works. So pretty easy. If you want a little more help, or you just even want to get a couple of quick ideas, get somebody to help you think about your sales process in a way, then pop an email over to me right now. Or you can also welcome to send me a text message, 415-596-0804, 415-596-0804. Send me a text. Just say, text the word private, let me know who you are, and I'll check out a little bit more about your company. If I think I can help you out, we'll book in some time, have a chat. So that's it for now. Thanks so much